the Washington State Data Center Conference. My name's Erica Gardner, and again, for those who don't know me, I work for OFM, and I'm the lead for the Washington State Data Center. For our second talk, we will have Jennifer Hunter-Childs talk to us about the Pulse surveys. Jennifer Hunter-Childs is the Assistant Center Chief of the Emerging Methods and Applications Division at the Center for Behavior Science Methods branch at the Census Bureau. Hopefully I got that right. And we're really excited to have her. Just as housekeeping, please enter your questions during the presentation into the chat, and then if you have any outstanding questions, you can ask them during the question and answer period. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Jennifer.
Erica, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks for having me this morning, I guess, on the Pacific Coast. I'm going to be talking to you today. Kathy Buffington will be talking about the Small Business Pulse Survey. If folks can mute themselves, that would be helpful. I hear a little bit of background noise. So my goal this morning is to tell you a little bit about the data collection, kind of what's been done and what's there. And my goal is to point you, if you haven't seen the data, to point you there so that you can use it for any purposes that you might have. It's really interesting and dynamic data, and I'd love for you to take full advantage of it. So the Household Pulse Survey was designed to deploy quickly and efficiently. So back in March, we all collectively realized that there was a problem that was going to cause social and economic distress in the country. And we, the Census Bureau, wanted to be able to measure the changes that were happening and the effects on the American population. So we quickly deployed a survey. It's probably quicker than anything we've done at the Census Bureau before. So the development time period was between March and April 23rd. We started data collection on April 23rd. Data collection, I'll tell you a little bit about the differences in a moment, but there's two phases of data collection and there's two phases of data available for your use. It is an experimental data collection. You'll see as we go on that response rates are really low, much lower than anything that's typically collected for the federal government or for official statistics. So these are experimental data products, but our goal here was really to get something out quickly so that data users would have access to closer to real-time data. So our partners in this are listed on the right-hand side: the Bureau of Labor Statistics, National Center for Health Statistics, Housing and Urban Development, National Center for Education Statistics, the USDA Economic Research Service, and we work closely with the Office of Management and Budget in this whole process. So for phase 2, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics and the Social Security Administration also collaborated with us in adding questions. So a lot of the topics that you're going to see when I get to the slide on topics come from these different agencies. So the reason that we were able to launch this so quickly is that we had in our research toolbox, we had a development platform called Qualtrics that's often used in academic research. We were using this for research and development at Census. So we already had FedRAMP moderate authorization, so we were able to collect Title 13 data and protect it according to our own standards. So we had the Census Bureau authority to operate to do that. So we had this structure in place, and that's what allowed us to do this so quickly when it became apparent that we needed to do it in March. So for invitations to the survey, we could theoretically have mailed out invitations to the survey, except for our National Processing Center was shut down at this time period, so that was not an option. So instead, we took advantage of what we call the alternate contact frames. So these are email and cell phone frame, or email and phone frames, I should say, that are matched to the master address file. So we've been collecting these types of data anytime a respondent provides an email or a cell phone number to us. And we've also purchased these numbers. So in the past, these have been used if an interviewer needs to contact a housing unit, they can look up what a likely phone number for the housing unit is. And so that's kind of the genesis of this frame, but we've used it a little bit in research, but the Household Pulse Survey, was the first time that we've actually used it for a production data collection. You can see a little bit of information about the frame here. It has decent, though not complete coverage, I guess is the main point I would point out. So our content, the topics for phase 1 and phase 2, you can see phase 2 is in red here, and the topics that were in both phase 1 and phase 2 are in black. So you can see here actually that we about doubled the questionnaire for phase 2. So for phase 1, we asked some general questions, and then in phase 2, we got a little bit more specific about a few different things. So you can see those laid out here. You can also see them in the data tool that I'll show you momentarily. So our data collection for phase 1, I mentioned, began in April 23rd and went through July. We took about a month hiatus to make some changes between phase 1 and phase 2, and then started up again August 19th, and this data collection is scheduled to go through October 26th. I'll tell you what comes after that in a few minutes. So this is an email and text message invitation. During phase 1, we were doing a 1-week data collection, but it was actually a little bit shorter than a week. What we did was we launched the survey on Thursday, collected data through Tuesday, and then closed down on Wednesday to turn around the files. During phase 1, we had weekly data releases at the national, state, and 15 largest MSA levels. We did have longitudinal sample in phase 1, but the response rates, a person was invited to participate 3 weeks in a row. Response rates for week 2 and week 3 were not very good at all. So, and for phase 2, we actually dropped the longitudinal sample and just had fresh sample every 2 weeks. So that's another big change for phase 2. It's now a 2-week data collection, so a respondent has much more time to respond, and that's improved our response rates considerably. Data are released every 2 weeks now, according to the data collection periods. So here are our response rates. I've sort of alluded to this before. So you can see we had a little, in the beginning of this, so week 1, 2, 3, we had a little bit of kind of growing pains getting up and running. Week 1 actually lasted 2 weeks. But by week 3, we were fully in the field with our data collection processes completely up and running. And then you can also see we had about a 3% response rate throughout wave 1. In wave 2, when we made the data collection period 2 weeks, you can see that we're at a 10% response rate now. So our response rate is better given the more time to do data collection. So here's the data. So this is the phase 1. This is a static picture of the phase 1 data tool. So this shows the types of information that you can get, and that you can get it at the state level as well. So they're displayed separately because there is a break in data collection between phase 1 and phase 2 for the changes that we mentioned before. So this is the phase 1 data collection tool, and then now I'm showing the phase 2 data collection tool. I'm going to go through and highlight a couple of the findings from Washington State. No, households sampled for the ACS were not excluded. We did not do that, so a person could have been invited to both at the same time. So this shows, so you can see here, I don't think I have a pointer that works, but this is the expected loss in employment income. So this is a percentage of adults who expect someone in their household to have a loss of employment in the employment income in the next 4 weeks. So this could be the loss of their job, or just a cutback in the number of hours or the amount they're working. And you can see it here. It's displayed for the United States, plus in the bottom section you can see what it is for Oregon and Washington. And you can also see the graph at the top right of where Washington falls in along with the other states. The next graph shows about telework. So this is the percentage of adults living in households where at least one adult has substituted some or all of their typical in-person work for telework because of the pandemic. And again, you can see here how Washington falls in with other states. And these you can play with yourselves. So you can see on the left-hand column, we're going down the toolbar here. So food scarcity, the percentage of adults in households where there was either sometimes or often not enough food in the last 7 days. So these numbers, thankfully, are lower than the numbers before, but they're still higher than we'd like them to be. Housing insecurity, percentage of adults who are not current on rent or mortgage payments, or who have slight or no confidence that their households can pay next month's rent or mortgage on time. So this is a combination of a couple of items indicating housing insecurity. Next is likelihood of eviction or foreclosure. So this is percentage of adults living in households where eviction or foreclosure in the next 2 months is either very likely or somewhat likely. So again, these are large error bars, but scary to see the numbers nonetheless. The next, difficulty paying for usual household expenses. So this is the percentage of adults living in the household where it has been somewhat or very difficult to pay for usual housing expenses during the pandemic. So that's between 20 and 30%. And then the last in this series here is the percent of adults in households where at least one adult was planning on taking post-secondary classes, but for whom the plans have either been canceled or changed in a significant way. And you can see that these are pretty high. So and anyone attending post-secondary education has had some kind of plan, some kind of change in their plans, which is maybe what you would expect given all that you've seen in the news lately. So those are some of the state level findings. All of these data are available at the state level. I'm just going to show you some different ways that you can look at the different data. So this is over time nationally. So the employment, it shows loss of employment income in housing units for adults 18 plus by presence or absence of children. So the dark bars here are households with children and the lighter bars are households without children. So you see overall, households with children are more likely to live in a household where some of the adults lost some of their income during the pandemic. This is the same measure, and you can see the red line is the United States, and then you can see the metro areas. So you can see that they range from a high of 58.3% in the LA area down to the Seattle metro area is actually the lowest measured metro area. According to this measure. This graph shows confidence in paying rent and mortgage among those with income. It shows you by income here. So these are just different ways that you can look at the data that are available. This slide comes from the National Center for Health Statistics and is one of the most interesting and troubling pieces of data that I think has come out of here. And it shows, so the right-hand column is the National Health Interview Survey. So a typical last 2 weeks in the beginning of last year saw anxiety and depressive symptoms around 6, 7, 8%. The combination of anxiety and or depressive disorder at 11%. But during this time, during the pandemic, people are reporting vastly more symptoms of depressive disorder and symptoms of anxiety disorder. So you see these numbers shooting to 25 to 35% overall. And so you can see that the drastic difference between what's normal and what's happening during this pandemic time. The National Center for Health Statistics has some really neat analyses beyond this on their website. I encourage you to look at those if it's of interest to you. So here, this is a similar slide to the one I showed before. So this is anxiousness across time, feelings of anxiousness and presence or absence of children. So you can see households with children, there's more anxiousness than households without children over time. And then this is the same slide expressing feelings of worry. Food sufficiency. So this is households where adults reported getting enough to eat or prior to the pandemic, but not enough to eat during the pandemic. And you can see it's a little higher for households with children, again, than households without children. In education, so this is % of adults living with children in grades K through 12 who are using online resources for distance learning. And then this is broken up by the education of the adult. So this is showing parents with less than high school degree, that 60% are trying to help their kids with distance learning. You see that a higher rate for the bachelor's and higher degree. The mortgage rent, so this is a similar slide to the one I showed before. So confidence in paying next month's rent or mortgage divided by whether or not there's children in the household. So I encourage you to look at the data yourself and kind of parse it in whatever ways you're interested in. I can share these slides with Erica or Barbara so they can be distributed so you don't have to frantically write down the URLs here. But that's all I have now. I saw a couple questions come in and I didn't read them quick enough to answer them. Let's see, I could stop sharing my slide and go look at the questions.
Yeah, we can help you with that, Jennifer.
Okay.
So one of the questions that came in, it says, given the sample sizes / error ranges and changing economic circumstances, when utilizing an individual state's data, for example, doing a state analysis for local policymakers, would you suggest using a multi-week rolling average, or does that create more problems than it solves?
I think you can. I think I would just be careful combining phase 1 and phase 2 because of the methodological differences. I would be careful combining those, but combining rolling weeks, I think does increase your sample size.
And then we have heard about non-response bias due to COVID in the ACS and CPS. What is known about non-response bias in the household pulse surveys, especially given response rates are 3 to 10%?
So that analysis has yet to be done. So that it's on our list of things that we know needs to be done, but we haven't conducted a non-response bias analysis yet. So stay tuned.
And that's what we have so far. So if anybody else has a question for Jennifer, please go ahead and type it in the chat while we still have her. And then I'm going to ask, sorry if I missed this, but is there going to be a phase 3, or what is the plan for future phases?
Oh, I think maybe I didn't have that slide. I meant to. So yes, we're working with Office of Management and Budget on continuing the data collection beyond the end of October. So I think, we'd hoped that the pandemic would be over by the end of October, but now that it looks like it might not, we're considering how much longer we would need to extend the data collection. So I think the short answer is yes, most likely, but it hasn't been approved yet.
Okay.
So a new question came in. Oh, yeah. Go ahead and handle it, Heidi.
Okay. What are the sample sizes for the U.S. and Washington?
So the sample sizes for the United States are around 1 million cases per data collection period. I don't know the sample size off the top of my head for Washington.
Okay.
I wish I could find it, but I don't have it right now.
Again, this is Erica. Just thinking about non-response. So given what we knew about the ACS and CPS, can we just sort of generally say that people who are responding are in better circumstances economically and educationally than those who are not responding? I mean, would that be something that would be safe to say What are your thoughts?
So I think we could hypothesize, but these are different data collection mediums. So we're connecting with people via text message and email, which is different than the CPS and ACS. So I know that when looking at the phase 1 versus phase 2 is getting more of the disadvantaged groups, or the more of the typically hard to count groups than phase 1, but I don't know how that compares to the population overall. So I think we need to do some of our own analyses before we conclude that it's similar to ACS and CPS, just because the data collection means are different. So it's possible that different people answer an email via text, or answer a survey via text message, than would answer the phone if a CPS interviewer called them.
And I'm just curious, when do you think you might have some of those preliminary analyses done?
You know, I'm not sure. I could probably get back to you on that, but the team has been frantically collecting data, and I'm not sure has had a lot of time to do that analysis yet.
It's
but
understandable.
I know it's on the list.
I was just wondering, you know, from demographics, you know, you could look at education or distributions of your respondents and that sort of thing to get a sense of who you are getting and who you're missing.
Right. It's possible that some of the team has done some of that already. I just don't have it at my fingertips. Yes, the results are weighted.
All right, does anybody else have any questions? If so, go ahead and submit them in the chat while we still have Jennifer on the phone.
Looks like there's a question that just came in.
Actually, it's I think it's a response. The Washington sample size is approximately 27,500 for both week 13 and week 14.
Thank you, Cass. Cass is the survey director for the Household Pulse Survey.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome. And that's probably unweighted, I want to say.
Is it possible to get the data in a flat file to enable its use in Tableau or similar visualizations?
I think if you download the public use file, it's a flat file.
And that's available on the Pulse Surveys website? Okay. And then we've got another one. Any chance that the list of MSAs will be expanded?
I doubt it, because the amount of data that we need to collect and the sample size of 1 million cases per data collection period to get at the 15 largest MSAs, I doubt that we're going to go larger than that at this point. I think in the future, the Census Bureau is working on the ability to respond to other national emergencies, national or regional emergencies. And so I think if there were a situation where we were trying to look at a regional issue, we might be able to do something different with the MSAs. But I think for this particular data collection, this is probably as low of geography as we can get.
And then Cassie sent everybody a link for the survey information. I'm showing we've got another one. I was going to say no other questions, but something popped in. Can you confirm how we should analyze multiple weeks together? The documentation seemed to suggest dividing the weights by the number of weeks, but I wanted to confirm.
I'm not the best person to answer that question. Cass, do you know the answer off the top of your head?
I don't know the specific answer. I know there's like rules for pooling the data. In the technical documentation, but I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and if you email me, I'll get the answer.
Thank you.
Okay, is it Kathy? Are you going to be presenting or?
Hello?
Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I sure can. Yeah, I have slides ready.
Okay.
If you want me to share my screen.
Yes, that's what I was just going to do.
Yeah. Let me.
Okay, there we go.
Well, bear with me for just a second.
It's okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
It's always great to share the stage with the household pulse. Okay, so thank you for having me this morning. My name is Kathy Buffington, and I'm sort of the companion to Cassandra Logan, who is the survey director for the Household Pulse. I am the acting survey director for the Small Business Pulse, and I'm pleased to be here to talk to you today about the survey. Well, if my page down doesn't seem to want to, whoop, there we go. Sorry about that. So I'm not gonna belabor this. The Small Business Pulse had a very similar start that the Household Pulse did. Back in March, we knew we needed to do something to provide high frequency data with geographic and industry detail during the pandemic. We focused on small businesses because they are typically an important component of any policy response. They represent the majority of businesses in the country and employ about 40% of workers in the United States. And so it was easy to focus on the Small Business Pulse. It made our processing and data tabulation also easier. And since we were all home and we were using kind of repurposed staff who were working kind of two jobs to do it, that was our focus. We wanted to measure the overall effect on businesses as well as their the effect of the pandemic on their core operations and finances. And we wanted to also kind of try to track policies that were being targeted to these businesses. So like the Household Pulse, we've done 2 phases. Ours are 9 weeks long. We did one from April 26th to June 25th. And we paused and regrouped and created new content. And then we began again August 9th. And we will finish up, gosh, I think we have about 2 more weeks left. Like the Household, we're an experimental rapid response survey, and we consider ourselves a proof of concept, right? We're not an official program, but instead are sort of this kind of patched together survey, trying to make it work. We've partnered, like Household, with external agencies that have subject matter experts. So the Small Business Administration, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, the ITA, the Minority Business Development Agency in the first phase. And in the second phase, we also worked with BTS, NTIA, the Office of Tax Analysis at Treasury, as well as the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Because we were on a shoestring, and a very short time frame, we leveraged all of our existing systems and surveys to create the Small Business Pulse. So we use our collection system Centurion that was built in-house. We use Economic Programs Oracle databases for our back-end processing, and we leveraged something called HighCharts for a really rapid development web interface. And we decided at the beginning that a highly usable web interface would be the primary way that we disseminate data, and hope that it would make it as useful as possible. The National Processing Center was closed in April. In March and April, there were no people there to mail letters. So like the Household Pulse, we are an electronic contact strategy survey only. So we use emails. We mail them on Sundays, and we do follow-up on a Wednesday, and we close out the survey on a Saturday. We've been fortunate to have a high voluntary response rate of over 25%. And we also track what we're calling a conversion rate. So that is the percent of businesses that respond to our survey conditional on actually opening the email. So, that reflects that, if we can get people to open the email, we have a higher response rate, basically. So the businesses included are those single location employer businesses with fewer than 500 employees and revenue reported to the IRS that reported an email address on their economic census in 2017. So we have about 1 million small businesses that result from these limitations, I guess, or constraints, and they're representative of about 5.6 million small businesses. Because we have an extensive data infrastructure at Census, we're able to only ask them very short qualitative questions about kind of the state of their affairs, and we don't need to ask them about their address, the kind of business or NAICS classification that they're in, that sort of thing, because we already have that, we've collected it, and it's on our frame. In the first phase of the Small Business Pulse survey, we decided to have kind of a narrative structure to our content. And because it was qualitative mostly in nature, and because we wanted it to be very easy for people to take on their on their smartphones, on the tablet, so we kept the questions pretty simple, and it has a narrative structure. So it opens with a question about overall, how is this business doing? And it closes with a question of kind of overall, when do you think you're going to get back to normal? In between that, we have core concepts that are centered around operations, challenges the business might be facing, and finances of the business. So operations include questions about revenue and employees, as well as temporary closures. Challenges included in the first phase, whether or not you had pivoted to a new good or service, if you pivoted to curbside carryout or delivery modes of getting goods to your customers, and whether or not you had supply chain disruptions. And if you think back to April, kind of all of those things were kind of at the forefront of what was going on in like retail and services. And then finance questions, we ask about the amount of cash that the business has on hand or their liquidity, whether or not they've defaulted on loans or other payments. And then we cover requests for assistance and whether or not businesses received assistance through a variety of programs. So in phase 2, remember, which started up in August, we left sort of the first question unchanged, and then our outlook question here at the end, we actually needed to add that the business had returned to normal, as well as that the business had permanently closed in terms of their expectations. So when you think about how long until you're going to return to normal, well, it could be that if you were unaffected or had a small effect between April and August, or bounce back, right, that return to normal would be a choice you could make. In the operations questions, we added questions about whether or not you had brought back furloughed or laid off employees, and also questions about working from home and whether or not the business is using, had a change in their use of online platforms, right? Did you pivot towards selling more things online than you had before the pandemic? Within our challenges questions, we dropped the 2 pivot questions for goods and services and carry out and delivery, and added a pair of questions on capacity and the change in capacity, as well as future needs. And then finally, in our finance questions, we added additional federal programs. I think I've covered most of this. I'll just note that we do publish extensive data in download formats. I think they're commonly delimited files. There's national and state level data, as well as the 50 largest MSAs by population. There's also 2-digit sector data, as well as sector by state data. We do have 1 million small businesses in our sample. It's not really a survey sample, but in our target population. And so sort of split over 9 weeks, we have 100,000 businesses each week that we survey, and that sort of really large size allows us to do kind of detailed statistics. So I mentioned that the Small Business Pulse survey has a kind of highly usable visualization, set of visualizations. One of them is, I'm going to kind of walk through each of the concepts that the survey is built around, and try to demonstrate both something interesting about the data as well as some of the tools that are on the website. So On the landing page for the survey, there is a map of the U.S. and includes, we do publish data for Puerto Rico as well as the 50 states and the District of Columbia. And what's really nice about the map is you can just quickly get a view of the variation by geography for these questions. So this was kind of mid-September, but the share of businesses that thought it would take more than 6 months for their business to recover. And you'll note here that Puerto Rico and Maine, and it looks like Rhode Island have the kind of the darker red. But we think what's going on with Maine there is that as summer wound up and tourism has wrapped up in Maine, that a lot of businesses maybe are looking at lean times. Kind of Hawaii consistently is also in one of the harder hit states. And again, I think that's likely due to kind of school starting and tourism being at much lower levels than normal. You can also note sort of states that were more hard hit by the pandemic seem to also have darker red versus those that maybe had less virus or looser shutdown restrictions, kind of being at the other end of the color spectrum. In terms of challenges, here I am showing the tool allows you to look at each of the questions and answers in the fullest amount of detail possible. So for a given week, these are all of the answers that businesses could select from for the question whether or not you had any of these challenges as they relate to supply chain. I've selected Oregon and Washington State. Since you're the Washington State Data Center, I thought that might be interesting to you. And what you'll note is that, so for instance, businesses in Washington State have a higher than the national average domestic supplier delays, about the average, about the same as the national average for foreign supplier delays. There's also, let's see, lower than average for some of the other delays. So delays in delivery or shipping to customers and locating alternate suppliers, as well as production delays. I guess production delays, it looks about the same. And again, all of these data are available for download. In terms of finance, this is a similar, it's the bar chart for finance and whether or not you've received financial assistance from any of these federal programs. And just a quick note here that, you know, Washington State, businesses in Washington State, small businesses on average received slightly less PPP than the national average, and a slightly more economic injury and disaster loans from the Small Business Administration than the national average. In terms of future needs, so we do ask businesses what they think they will need in the next 6 months. This was a question that we developed with the Small Business Administration as they try to plan for possible future programs. So you'll note that, and I'm going to show you this in a second, you'll note that certain questions, Washington State has more than the national average. So the customer safety and employee safety and the identify and hire new employees are higher for Washington State, whereas things like developing online sales and obtaining financial assistance is lower than the national average. And when we start getting into the detailed data, or when you start getting into detailed data, what we've been able to identify is that the state numbers and the differences across states are really being driven by the different composition of industries within those states. So again, kind of thinking back to Maine and Hawaii and what happened in September when the tourism drops off, sort of states that have a high concentration of tourists, you know, supporting their economy, right, as those taper off, their numbers kind of look worse. And the same can be said for MSA level data. The more, you know, kind of restaurant intensive some of the cities are, the worse the small business numbers look. So like San Francisco and New York versus some Midwest. Okay. And that's sort of a segue into a graph. Now this was created outside of the Small Business Pulse. But this is how much time you expect to return to normal, and it is by sector. So the Small Business Pulse is a cross-sectoral, kind of economy-wide, ignoring agriculture because that's not within our mission, survey. And the colors here represent, so yellow is sort of whether or not you've had no effect of the pandemic or you've already returned to normal. And then the blues are kind of between 1 and more than 6 months. And then the red up at the top, or whether you don't expect to ever return to normal, so never, or your business is permanently closed. So what you see by the variation in the sort of the gold bars is that some sectors, sort of their bar is dominated by gold. So 22 is utilities, 23 is construction, 51 is, I think, finance. In the 50s, these are largely what I like to call kind of desk jobs. They're services such as finance, insurance, real estate. So service sectors that you don't have customer interaction necessarily face-to-face. And then you'll see where the smallest bars, where the businesses have returned to normal, 72, which is food and accommodation, right, has the tiniest little bar stack. And I think 72 also probably has the longest red stack, right? So those businesses reporting that they will never return to normal or that they've closed. So the point of this being there's considerable variation across sectors in terms of when they think they're going to return to normal. And that seems to be driving a lot of our results. And kind of the companion to that is these are just the 10 most populous states. Sorry, Washington. You don't make this list. But what you'll see here is that the variation, right, in terms of like the how the golds vary and how the reds vary, right, is much less so across geography and far more so across sectors. So we really do think kind of, and it makes sense, and other data sources support this, that this is really being driven by your industry mix. Right. And last, I just wanted to throw up the bar chart of Washington State and Oregon to show the mix of businesses that report their expectations about when they're going to think they're going to return to normal. The good news is very few businesses reporting that they've permanently closed for Washington State, and a small share, smaller than the national average, don't believe they'll never return to normal. Just briefly, all of the data that you've seen in the visualizations, as well as data that you haven't seen in the visualizations, such as the state by sector detail, are available for download. We have the questionnaires and the code books and the data dictionaries, as well as documentation, all available online by week. I believe they're also zip files, yes, where you can grab all of the files. And again, there are URLs for getting the data for the Small Business Pulse survey, but if you do type Small Business Pulse Census in Google, right, you can also get there. And so I am going to, stop sharing so that I can also see if there are any questions.
Yep, so we can help you with that, Kathy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Barbara.
We got a few that came in. All right, so our first question is, some small businesses were closed permanently during the early pandemic shutdown. Was the survey still able to reach those businesses?
Okay, that's a great question. And so, I think kind of one of the issues that I think the Census Bureau and the Economic Directorate is going to struggle with and really work on is how to measure what we call business deaths or exits, right? And so it's interesting because in the second phase so let me back up. At the very beginning of the survey, we were very worried about if your business is closed, you're not going to answer the survey, and therefore we're going to bias our estimates to be overly optimistic, right? If the people that are in the worst possible situation don't answer, then we're only kind of hearing from people that are surviving, right, and that are doing okay. So that's always been kind of in our documentation, right, about the survey limitations. But when we do these talks, right, we do like to talk about that there's possible bias. Interestingly, in phase 2, we did add questions about whether or not the business was permanently closed. And I think every week we get between 1.3 and 1.7% of respondents answering that. So that comes out to be kind of a national average of about like 90,000 businesses, say, somewhere between like 75 and 90, I think, thousand businesses, right, on average, are reporting that they're closed. That is, they're saying, my business is closed, but I'm still answering your survey. We know that that's a floor, right? That's like at minimum, and it's probably far too low, right? But it is interesting that they're answering. So that said, I know that someone else has asked, is there any other sources that track openings, closings, and bankruptcies? So the Census Bureau does produce data on business dynamics. So the business dynamic statistics, they are annual, though, however, and so I think the 2018 data are coming out this week, right? So that's of limited use in the middle of the pandemic when you're trying to learn about that. I'd also point you to an external data source, right? So I have to plug the Census Bureau products first, but if you look at the, it's called the Economic Tracker from Opportunity Insights, and I can type that in the window too. They do have something that's, I think, kind of experimental or researchy that is based on credit card data. So they do produce for industries that are highly centered around credit card data. So, restaurants, retail, transportation services like airlines and food services, right? You can look at state level, city level, and national level spending data, and they track, they call a business closing as like someone that hasn't received receipts through credit cards in the last 3 days. So that's a really interesting place to look. As far as bankruptcies, I don't know. The Census Bureau doesn't collect data on bankruptcies. I think there are probably lots of private sources that are publishing now data on bankruptcy filings, but I don't know those. As far as the, someone asked about when things don't add up to 100, it's for, somebody posted the Opportunity Insight link, thank you. As far as when things don't add up to 100%, it's because of disclosure avoidance. So if a cell doesn't reach a certain threshold with the number of businesses reporting, it won't add up to 100 because we suppress a value or 2 or 3, however many required.
And then what are your, we asked Jenny, and what are your plans for phase 3 or beyond?
So I think we are also I think we're probably in the same position. We are planning on, we're hoping to resume the survey in November, in mid-November. The surveys require approval through the Office of Management and Budget. I believe we've published a request for comment or Federal Register notice, as part of that process, but it has not been approved yet. So it is pending approval.
Well, we still have Kathy. If anybody has any other questions, please go ahead and type them in the chat. All right, I'm showing no other questions at this time.
Well, I would just like to say thanks again for having me, and I appreciate the questions that we did receive.
And this is Erica Gardner. Thank you again for telling us about the small business pulse survey.
Great. Have a nice day, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. And for attendees, again, I will be posting the slides for this week, probably early next week on OFM's SDC site, and I will be sending an email out to registrants to let you know that I've done that. Does anyone have any last questions before we sign off for the day? Okay, well, I'll see you next week. Next week we have a presentation on the economic census and other econ topics like the Census Business Builder, and then also a presentation on differential privacy and the impact that will have on 2020 census data. So I'd encourage anyone who has not registered to go ahead and register for next week's sessions. And with that, I guess I'll sign off. Thank you, Heidi and Barb, for your help on today's presentations.